Hi, my name's Caroline. I'm one of the speech and language therapists working here at South Tees NHS Trust. This video today is to introduce some of the work we do with babies and children with complex care needs and learning difficulties, and in particular we're going to be introducing working with pre-verbal communication skills. Some of our children have conditions that we know about from birth, such as Down syndrome, Prader-Willi syndrome or Angelman syndrome. Some of our children may have physical difficulties such as spina bifida, or they may have genetic conditions which affect their learning. Some of our children may have conditions such as cerebral palsy, which we might not get a diagnosis for until a little later, and it's our job to work with a wider health team to make sure these children get support as early as possible. So our role as a speech and language therapist is to work with our babies and children to develop their communication skills. Some of our children will have wider difficulties with their development, such as they may have difficulties with their muscles and their movements. They may have difficulties with sensory impairments, with their sight or their hearing. They may have conditions such as epilepsy, or they may need to spend long periods in hospital, having surgery, or generally being unwell. All of these things can mean that their communication skills can be delayed, or they may develop in different ways. So we work with parents and families to understand their child's communication. We're often talking about using pre-verbal communication skills. Pre-verbal skills are the skills that babies and children use before they develop their verbal skills, their words and their talking. So we're often looking at skills and behaviours such as body movements, where a child might go very stiff if they're excited, or if they're scared. We might be talking things like eye gaze, where a child will look at things that they're interested in. And we might be thinking about behaviours such as facial expressions, obviously a smile if we're happy or a frown if we're sad, as well as noises such as laughing and giggling and crying if we're unhappy. Some children might use more physical behaviours such as reaching for a toy that they like, or throwing a toy that they're finished with, or they might point at something that they want you to get for them. Other children might go on to use gestures such as waving hello or goodbye. When we're working with pre-verbal communication skills, we need to think about communication as a two-way process. This is normally quite easy to understand when we're talking about words and talking. When we're having a conversation, one person talks while the other person listens to the message and tries to understand. And then we take turns. We switch, and the other person then talks and gives their message, and the first person listens and understands. So it's a two-way process where we take turns. With our pre-verbal children, we then need to think about how we get messages in for them to understand, as well as for them to take their turn and have their messages out that we can understand. So if we're thinking of getting messages in for our child, we need to think about using all of our senses and not just words. Words don't last very long, and different people can use different words at different times to mean different things. So we think about using all of our senses. One of the most important senses we can use is the sense of touch. So we might introduce on-body signing, where we will use the same touch and movements on the child's body for them to understand what's going to happen next. We might use objects that the child can hold and feel for as long as they need to understand what's going to happen. So for example, if a child is having suction, we might give them the suction catheter to hold so that they know what's going to happen next. We might use things like photos or symbols. So for example, we might use a photo of Nana to say that we're about to go to Nana's house to have dinner. Lastly, we can also think about using our sense of smell and using things like a lovely smelling body wash if it's about to be bath time. So when we've given the child our message and we've given them a way to understand what we want them to, we then need to think about how we allow our child to take their turn in communication. And the most important thing here is that we need to give our children space and time to give us their message. If we're looking after a child that has complex daily care needs, we can get very used to doing to our child. We wash them, we bath them, we change them. When it comes to communication, it's slightly different because we need to give them space and time to take their turn. We need to give them time to understand the message that we want to give them and time to give us the message they want to give us. We all know how annoying and frustrating it can be when you're talking to someone and they consistently talk over you and you can't get a word in edgeways and you can't take your turn. So it's important for our children that we give them time. All our children will communicate in different ways and we need to take time to stop and observe and see what they're telling us. So once we understand how our children are using their pre-verbal skills, we can go on to focus on concepts of more, stop and finish. These are really motivating concepts. Our babies and children are always going to be most motivated to communicate, to tell us when they like and they're enjoying something and they want more of it, or they don't like something and they want it to stop or finish. So our next video, we'll talk a little bit more about how we work on some of these concepts. So thank you for listening today. I hope you found this interesting and we hope that we can see you soon.